Allow me, knackered knobs, Sir Sugarpants Von Belvedere at your service with another mental movie that's the dog's bollocks. 1988's Unmasked Part 25. Cool, blimey. I suppose it's also known as The Hand of Bloomin' Death. And that's enough of a horrible Cockney accent. This movie is for anyone who ever thought, what if Jason Voorhees was British and was suffering from an identity crisis? Anyone? Oh. Well, apparently this movie is only for the people who made it. That doesn't mean it has to be hot garbage, regardless of what Seth Rogen's gang and Kevin Smith have been doing lately. So what exactly can we expect from a slasher comedy featuring the dry-as-a-month-old scone British form of humor? Let's chim-chimmery, chim-chim-chiroo that sleaze docket and find out. We have 11 dead bodies, 18 cups blood, 4 naked breasts, 2 naked butts, 1 naked dong, 1 face peeling, 1 heart-ectomy, 1 skull crushed by shovel, 1 garroted throat, double fence post impalement, lamp through the mouth, 1 head crushing, knife to the throat, knife to the gut, hatchet to the stomach, cleaver to the skull, nail to the back of the skull, ice pick to the front of the skull, 1 head bashing, 1 throat slashing, potato fork to the stomach, Cockney drunks, harbinger of impending doom cliche, non-functioning light switch cliche, 2 rights, religious statue fondling, kink shaming, meta-ness, patricide, Shakespearean foreshadowing, and awkward Hitler conversation. Our movie begins with some travel agency stock footage that's so bland and generic it literally can be used for just about any kind of movie. This is what they actually used. Now let's use this footage for a wacky buddy comedy. Now let's do a movie about class warfare featuring a modern girl who's just trying to survive the big city. See what I mean? 2 minutes of opening credits later, we meet up with some drunk Brits stuck in exposition mode and discussing the finer points of being alcoholics. This is Anne and Pete, and they're heading to a party at an abandoned house. Suddenly, a homeless man jumps out from the shadows and warns them to not go into that house.
An evil child was born in there, and now he's come back from far away to avenge his birthplace.
But they ignore his ramblings and continue stumbling down the path. Suddenly, an arm bursts through the fence, grabs Pete, and brandishes a machete. Oh, it's just a prank, bro. It's just one of their drunken mates, Albert. Pete and Anne angrily go into the party while Albert goes to the car for some beer. You know, separating from the group and all that. Suddenly, a hockey-masked individual runs up to Albert, peeling his fucking face off and punches his heart out from the back. Okay, movie, you have my attention. And it took less than 7 minutes. Back inside, the insufferable louts are having about the level of conversation you'd expect. Bitching about work, bragging about sex, pining for drugs and alcohol. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be a full-on parody of the 80s slasher genre. Although Shelley is quietly sitting alone for some reason. One of the couples moves to a separate room for some alone time, but before any cheeky shenanigans get started, Anne needs to pee, thus separating the separators. Pete hears a noise and stabs a curtain with a spear, but unlike in Hamlet, there's no one hiding behind the tapestry. See, I can be classy as fuck all up in this bitch. Once he lets his guard down, our masked baddie runs in and bashes his skull in with a shovel. Anne comes back, calling out for him over and over, and is garroted. Back at the main party, the other couple, David and Monica, break away for their own sexy time. And I'm guessing we can just assume they're already dead. They peel off their clothes and grind around the room. Our masked baddie slowly approaches with the previously revealed spear. He enters the room with a bit of a running start and pins the two to the wall together. Nice. Patty is complaining to Shelley about Albert disappearing, but Shelley says he's probably just passed out on a lawn. Apparently, Shelley was supposed to be set up with one of Patty's friends, but he didn't show up. That's when Patty heads upstairs to find the others so they can leave. She flips a switch that doesn't turn on the lights and feels her way to a table lamp. Once it's on, she sees the bodies of David and Monica and runs away straight to our killer. She recoils back into a neon sex room and finds herself trapped. She begs for her life and tries to appeal to his humanity by saying everyone has a bad day, but murder isn't the option. Then she offers sex, or a blowjob, which apparently is our killer's breaking point. He picks up a very tall lamp, smashes the bulb, and runs it clear through her face. He then dances around with the bloody corpse for a while before gently laying her down on the bed with a lit cigarette in one of his mask holes. That's when he gets up and makes a slow, sad walk down the stairs, crushes the smoke, and then finds himself in the room with Shelley. He pulls a knife, and that's when she stands up to change the record, revealing that she's blind. She knocks something to the floor, and when she goes to get it, she feels our killer's leg, wrongly assuming it's her blind date. Yeah, I deserve that one. She introduces herself, and our killer shakes her hand. And Shelley's quite the little chatterbox. She says she usually has to go to the parties alone and is very happy to have a date. She then asks if they can be friends, and our killer grunts. Suddenly, Shelley is very happy, thinking that he too has a physical impairment in not being able to speak. Well, it has to be fate, the blind dating the mute. Shelley says the group has pretty much left, so she invites our killer back to her house to listen to some music, and our killer drops his knife before following her home. She puts on some music and asks our killer to dance, but instead just talks about what it's like to be blind, how she feels like she's missing out on a lot of life. Then she admits that she plays up her nice girl image, but that she hates pretending. And that's when our killer drops his silent act.
I can speak.
And then admits that he doesn't talk because most people don't let him. Shelley leans in for a kiss and realizes he's wearing a mask. Our killer admits he hates wearing it, but it's what people expect. That's when he takes it off and Shelley kisses him, and then leads him to the bedroom. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on your point of view, we skip the sex and go straight to the afterglow. Shelley asks if he has any hobbies. Then she admits a lot of her friends are into S&M. That's when our killer says he's a monster with a horrible childhood. His father was an evil drunk, and his mother took him to the States to escape. There was a terrible accident at the summer camp he was at, and everyone thought he drowned, but he hadn't. Then we finally hear Shelley say our killer's name, Jackson.
I like you a lot, Jackson. You seem like a nice guy. You're considerate and sincere, and you washed up all the dishes after our tea.
Jackson drops the knife and continues explaining his story of teaching himself how to live in the wilds. He would read books left behind by the counselors, and then he goes off with some Byron.
The hand of death is on me, but not yours. 'Tis over. My dull eyes can fix thee not, but all things swim around me, and the earth heaves as were beneath me.
And thanks for turning Jason into a fucking poetry reciting pussy, Britain. Now that she's all gooey, Shelley invites Jackson out for a second date, a walk in the park. But Jackson hesitates because his appearance will make people laugh. Back at the abandoned home from earlier, we find out it's not quite so abandoned after all. It's where Jackson's alcoholic, abusive father lives. He chastises his son for not being smart enough to steal from his victims. Apparently, Jackson has some semblance of a moral code. Jackson admits that he doesn't want to kill anymore, but his father tells him killing has been in the insane family for generations. Jackson says he wants to change for Shelley, and his father asks, is she of our persuasion? Meaning, is she a psychopath? Then Dad goes on about how it doesn't happen to women, apparently. Father then tells his story. Both of his parents were destroyed when he was a child, and he became a merciless killer. Then he had a son and admits his son's time in America was the best thing for him as it taught him how to ignore the weakness his human mother gave him. Father then gives a bit of pity for his son considering he's got monster and human fighting in his head. Jackson insists that there must be a way for him, and his dad says he should have killed his wife and son and just be done with it. He then hands Jackson his mask and tells him to never show his face to him again. Out on their date, Shelley shows Jackson around to her favorite places in town. She asks what he likes to do for fun, and he says he likes the movies, and that he has a lot of friends in there. Shelley gets excited about knowing people who make movies, but he corrects her by saying they make movies about his friends. And I assume he's talking about other killers, maybe Freddy and Leatherface and that sort of thing. They stop at a dress shop, and Jackson describes the dress in the window. A couple walks up, and the man laughs at Jackson. He angrily says he could easily slit their throats and stop their laughter, but Shelley takes him to a costume shop instead. Jackson tries on a few masks and hats, but Shelley gets a hockey mask for herself so they can match. Jackson thinks she's making fun of him, but she just wants to make him feel comfortable. She then asks why he has to wear a goalie mask and look like that guy from the movies. He then admits he is that person from the movies, and then Shelley laughs because she thinks he's putting her on. We then have a lovely walk down by the duck pond at sunset and a snuggle on a bench. Back at home, Shelley's friend Christy has invited herself over to let her know there's a party coming up and she should bring her new man. Jackson watches as Christy leaves and follows her down the street. She looks uneasy and ducks into a pub where a group greets her. He follows her in, and the guys immediately assume Jackson's there filming a movie and invite him to sit with them. Barry and Nick admit that they're also actors, and Christy hands him a pen for an autograph. He doesn't talk or drink with them, and Nick starts getting snotty about it. Christy insists on her autograph, and instead he writes, "I slit your throat," and she leaves. Nick tries to take his mask off and gets stabbed in the stomach, and Jackson takes off. Christy and Mick run after him, but give up when Jackson runs into a very dark alley, momentarily becoming the smartest fucking people ever in a horror movie. Jackson makes another visit to his father and says a part of him must come to an end. His dad is packing what little he owns and says he stayed in the area for far too long. Father chuckles and said he was already gone, but he came back for a stupid photograph of his wife. Jackson grabs his father's head and crushes it with his bare hands. Shelley's laying on her fabulous couch when Jackson approaches her with a box of chocolates. He asks for some aspirin, and they move to the kitchen to make dinner. Shelley tells him about the party she was invited to and that she'd love it if he could attend. Distracted, Jackson slices his hand with the corkscrew. They sit down to dinner, but Shelley undercooked the chicken. But Sweetie Jackson says it's perfect. He tells her he was very lonely before he met her, and he wishes he could get rid of his mask someday. She approaches him and kisses his forehead, and we cut back to the bedroom, complete with cliché 80s British kink. Having problems performing, Jackson sits and listens to Shelley talk about how bad it was for her first time. He then admits that his first time was with a camp counselor.
She was dead.
They finally get into it, and Jackson just doesn't seem to enjoy being the submissive. So they switch, and Jackson reads up in the manual on how to do it, but just ends up feeling ridiculous. A car with Nick, Christy, Mick, and Barry pulls up to a house in the countryside where they all pile out and carry the injured Nick inside. They get him upstairs with the doctor's orders to stay in bed and nurse his stab wound. He tells the gang he's fine and he's still ready for the party, but Christy says she's already called everyone and canceled. The phone rings and Nick answers to a silent Jackson. And it's time for an introspective walk through the fast food district. Hey, it's Lee Ho Fooks. Anybody up for a dish of beef chow mein? Jackson's father's words keep repeating in his head along with the horrid 80s British hip-hop music they chose. He stops off at a payphone and calls up Shelley to tell her not to go out to any parties tonight, but doesn't explain why. After hanging up, he heads out on foot to the cottage in the countryside. At the house, the gang is joined by Charlotte and Megan, even though we heard earlier that the guests were told the party was off. And we get word that it's
Friday the 13th.
Mick and Charlotte head out to the pool, but she hears a noise and sees a shadow over by the hanging sheets. But when she checks, there's nothing there. Back inside, the conversation turns towards an audition that Barry was not supposed to bring up because Nick will be unable to attend due to his injuries. A production of Macbeth done in the style of street punk. Christy says she actually got him an audition next week. Then Nick whines about how overrated Shakespeare is, but immediately goes into soliloquy mode.
Stars, hide your fires.
Mick and Charlotte have moved from the pool to the middle of the woods. Charlotte wants to go back to the house, but Mick insists on staying and goes to get wood for a fire. Suddenly, Jackson jumps out with a pitchfork and goes on about how he wasn't given a choice but to kill. He warns her not to run because she'll only get about 10 feet or so. She then takes off and trips just as predicted. Jackson then impales her with the pitchfork. Back in the house, Nick is still bitching about how it's his destiny to keep playing Shakespeare and leaves to practice lines for his audition. Jackson watches from the trees, knife in hand, and eventually approaches. He trips him with a tree branch, calls his performance terrible, and then slices his throat. Barry and Megan move to a bedroom for some private time, and Megan steps into the bathroom to freshen up. Jackson barges in and puts a hatchet into Barry's stomach. Megan comes back to the bedroom, finds her dead boyfriend, and Jackson puts a cleaver through her face. Mick makes his way back to the house calling for Charlotte, who he wrongly assumes left him in the woods. He checks the shed because naturally that's where she would be, not inside the house or anything. Jackson pops out from behind some boxes and grabs Mick. He eyes a nail on the wall, slams Mick's head against it, and then jabs an ice pick into his forehead. Christy comes out to the shed and mistakes Mick for Nick, then screams when she realizes she's addressing a dead man. Jackson taps her on the shoulder and she takes off running. Jackson follows after her, but not before grabbing an axe and slowly trudging towards her shrill screams. She locks the door, but Jackson just smashes the door in. She runs upstairs and grabs the phone, but I guess it's dead. Then it's towards the bathroom to hide, but she finds Megan's corpse in the tub. Without any other options, she steps in with her dead friend and closes the shower curtain. She pulls the cleaver from Megan's skull and swings it at Jackson, but he dodges and smashes her head against the tile. He finishes her off and fully succumbs to his emo ennui.
It just all seems so pointless.
Shelley keeps trying to call her friends, but gets no response. That's when Jackson comes in, announces himself, and she embraces him. She admits to being very worried about him since he's been so quiet lately, even telling him that she was afraid he had found another woman. Jackson then asks if she'd like to live forever. She says she would, and that she's more happy than not. Jackson then says time's eternity would be a lot of suffering. He then waxes poetically about how they'll let her die or be forgotten, but he is designed to be a killer forever. He tells her after tonight they can never see each other again because he can't share his hell with her. But she says she loves him and that he's acting crazy. That's when she drops a real bombshell on him. She's pregnant. Jackson then says he couldn't put an innocent child through all of this. Jackson asks Shelley if she trusts him, and she says he does. He then asks her to forgive him, and then slashes her throat. Skip ahead a bit, and Jackson's walking a lonely pace down the street. He stops and notices something that makes him drop to his knees, screaming. It's a theater marquee showing the latest sequel in the movie series about him. The end. Eesh. I really don't know what to think about this one. I mean, I get what they were trying to do, but I don't know if they accomplished it. Or maybe I'm too American to be able to accept Jason Voorhees as a Shakespearean tragedy. The gore effects were good, and they really hit the ground running with that. But part of me wishes they never gave Jackson the ability to talk, or have him take his mask off. At least until the very end. Personally, I think having a silent antagonist through the entire movie, only to be unmasked and begin to speak at the end, would have been a much better treatment, and would have made a halfway decent little twist. It's not exactly a bad movie, but definitely one of the oddest slashers I've done on the show. Gregory Cox played our conflicted Cretan Jackson. He's got a few projects in the works as of this recording, but probably the most high-profile credit was a part in X-Men First Class as Dr. Lee. But I'll be damned if I can even find a picture or a still of that character. It's pretty far down the cast list, just past airport worker, Coast Guard, and U.S. Fire Control Officer. Edward Brayshaw played Father, but had been acting for a good 30 years prior to that. You might have seen him in Season 6 of Doctor Who as War Chief during the War Games episodes. Albert, the drunken prankster who got his face ripped apart at the very beginning, was played by Kristen Brando, son of Marlon Brando. And Mick was played by Adrian Huff, who's had a decent career. Some highlights include voicing Nightcrawler in X-Men the Animated Series and the video game X-Men Mutant Academy 2. Other credits include 2005's remake of The Fog, Underworld Evolution, Jennifer's Body, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Assassin's Creed 3, and was Mr. Grey in X-Men The Last Stand. Well, Pip, Pop, Spit, Spot, Bob's your uncle and all that rubbish. Time for me to bugger off to the next sleazy slime ball. And until I greet you then, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
Griswold, where do you think you're going to put a tree that big? Bend over and I'll show you. You've got a lot of nerve talking to me like that, Griswold.
I wasn't talking to you.